Well, hello and welcome to Ground Level's Wednesday Wisdom. Today we are delighted to be joined by Howard. Howard, would you like to say hello to everybody?
Hi everyone, great to be with you today.
Now, I'm sure most people in the network know who Howard is, but Howard, would you mind just giving us a brief introduction to who you are, what church you're from, and what your role is within that church?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so my name's Howard Williams. I am husband to Claire, father to three amazing boys. I live in Lincoln and I'm assistant pastor within a live church, working with Stuart and Irene Bell there, the Vision Core team and our various staff teams and teams across the church. And in recent months, Claire and I have also become the location pastors of our Alive Lincoln Central building. Many of you will know me from some of my role at One Event and worship role there. We're working alongside the worship teams and I've got a history of worship leading as well, but now more so around church leadership and pastoring within the church.
Great. You're always a man of many hats, aren't you, Howard?
Yes. Yes.
You've always got some wisdom to apply to every area of church leadership.
Well, we'll see.
So today we are going to cover the topic of restructuring church, and Howard's put together some steps for us on how to restructure church well. But before we kind of dip into those kind of practical process thoughts, Howard, I'd love for you to give us some context on where this falls at the moment for you in your Alive context. What journey Alive's been on through the past sort of almost year, I suppose now, and what kind of season you guys have been through and what that restructuring has looked like for Alive.
That's great. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so the context for us is that as COVID, the global pandemic, began to unfold for us March last year, we had to restructure super quickly, pretty much like every single one of us as churches had to. And that restructuring for us took place over about 4 days. We had to navigate to becoming an online church, to delivering our ministry in a whole variety of ways. We restructured a number of areas, not only in how to make a Sunday service work online, but actually how to do great pastoral care, how to connect people into small groups, how to be missional, how to be compassionate to our local communities, etc. And we did that, this kind of pivot point, super quickly. And then within a number of months, we started to ask the question, what are we learning in this? What's God speaking to us about? What are we discovering in the middle of this process? Knowing that we weren't going to stay in that forever, but what things will be carried forward? What things will we love to see in the life of the church as we move forward from this? What things have we discovered that have been kind of gifted to us through this period of time that perhaps we wouldn't have found beforehand? And a whole number of things started to come out of that. New language started to appear, and then new kind of structures of how we felt the church should operate moving forward, having learned from some of the things that we learned in those first few weeks of COVID. So we are in a process at the moment where we've articulated a brand new structure. We've taken some steps towards it, and over the next course of the next few months, depending on what happens in the kind of global sense at this moment of time, we'll go further towards that restructure, that new structure, that new way of operating. So our vision and our values have stayed exactly the same. Our kind of big strategic plan has stayed the same, but our structure and our mechanisms for achieving that, we've reshaped, and we'll go into that in a few more details in a few minutes, Jason.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it'd be great, Howard, if you could explain practically what that's looked like for you guys,
Great.
how church looks different or how you plan on it looking different. I know in some ways it's been a bit of a staggered start, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, could you explain for everybody what that actually looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So Alive Church is what we call a multi-site church. So this time last year, we had 7 locations of Alive in the Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire and Norfolk regions of the nation. And that's our global strategy. So we're going to continue to plant new locations. But one of the things that we learned through those first few weeks, first couple of months of COVID, was one of the most important things that we were doing and learning was around relationships. That relationships were crucial and critical to our moving forward. Deep connections for people with people. One of the things we were missing was the actual physical connection. But one of the things we were learning is that small groups, calls one-to-one with one another, medium-sized settings of people were more effective than solely the largeness of one big group. So we've restructured in a few areas. The first is that we changed some language. We changed some language from kind of systems and structures and organization to relationship and family, and beyond connection to life. So we changed our connect groups to life groups. So, and within that, we put a little tag, doing life together. With this sense that actually we want to move out of this season beyond just being connected to one another to living meaningful lives alongside one another. That kind of sense of us being joined together, knowing one another, living life alongside one another. So we did that. And then we brought a new structural element to the life of the church into our locations. And we've put a structural element in that we call alive communities. And communities are a number of people gathered in a locality to a maximum of around about 120 people. Prior to COVID, we've done some learning, we've done some research, and we've been taking on a bit of a journey around meaningful relationships for humans. How does the Bible describe the sizes of relationships? And also, what does psychology and science inform us that actually is our capacity as humans for meaningful connections with one another? And we were beginning to learn and discover that actually we all have a capacity of around about 120 of deep, meaningful connections. And of course, all of us have our close family connections at that level. And then we kind of grow out in various concentric circles towards that about 120 people. Above and beyond that, we know names, but we don't know a lot of information, details, connection points with people above and beyond that. And because Alive had a number of kind of component parts that we call locations above 120, we found that we were going to need to put a new structure in place to maximize those great relationships. So we've built this structure with Alive communities. And therefore, to oversee our Alive communities, we've also brought through a whole bunch of new leaders that we call life pastors. So every one of our Alive communities is pastored by life pastors, and every one of our locations is pastored by a location pastor. The couple of other things, because it all gets a little bit complicated, but a couple of other things is every one of our location pastors is a life pastor as well. So every location pastor oversees a community within that location. But some of our locations have more than one community within them. So for example, the location that I location pastor with Claire now have 4 communities built into that location. So we life pastor one of the communities, and we have 3 other amazing couples who life pastor other communities. So we're one location working together as a team, but actually at pastoral care level and actually at service level as well. When we get back to physical gatherings, communities will run their own services. So we've now got across Alive 18 communities into 8 locations. We launched a brand new location in the middle of this pandemic as well. So you can see now kind of the breadth of pastoral care delivered through our life group leaders, our life pastors in communities, and our location pastors. And then, of course, the final thing to say about Alive is we are still one church. And we believe that we've got an apostolic call to this region, to the nation as well. And therefore, we do other activities that we call gathering activities that are for the whole church, where the whole church come around our centralized vision again and gather again on a monthly basis. So a number of structural things that have a whole number of layers to them, Jason.
That's brilliant, Howard. Thank you. And that certainly does sound like a massive restructure, doesn't it? And I think I'd love us to be able to just talk through some of the things that you found in that process of how you communicated some of that information. I think even as you just kind of summed that up in a nutshell then, there's so much in there in terms of how you've restructured the church, how you've changed things that were done before. And there's absolutely loads that we could talk about, you know, how was some of that received? How did you come to some of these models? But I think to just kind of drill us down today to this Wednesday Wisdom, there may be more to come if there's an appetite, just for kind of how you found that process of restructuring. And I know Howard's been very organized and prepared as six things that we're going to talk through today in terms of how to restructure church. So I'd love it, Howard, if you could plunge into some of the things that you learn or you found are really key steps in communicating and implementing that restructure.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jason. So yeah, 6 steps for restructuring well. Step number 1, I would suggest, is have a biblical stroke spirit-breathed vision. And people much cleverer than I would put it like this: have a clear vision of a desired future state. So in other words, take an assessment of where are we at right now, call that point A, and then draw a line and call it point B, and effectively say, okay, we see something that is better than where we're currently at, and that becomes your vision, desired future state. And the beauty of doing that is that you work out of a place that is spirit breathed and it is vision dominated. So one of the dangers of structure and systems and all the things that we need to have is that they can have the ability to override vision. Whereas actually when God has spoken something and we caught it, that is where we need to go towards. So it starts with an assessment of where are we at right now? And it looks like assessing where do we want to be. So that looked like for us at Alive, around about June, July time last year, a number of us as leaders were starting to have conversations behind the scenes, and often vision casting starts with conversations. Started to have conversations about what are we learning at the moment? In other words, where are we? What's happening right now that is informing where we're going? And then we were also starting to say, but we don't want to stay here. We don't want to stay in this particular thing. So are there things we don't want as part of our desired future state anymore? Are there things that actually we can't return to? I remember even personally saying to Stuart, some kind of language of, Stuart, if I return to that out of this season, I feel like I will have missed something. I feel like God is asking me into, he's speaking a new vision. There's something I'm learning in this that is telling me that there's actually a new way to go. And for us, as I said earlier, we articulate that with brand new words. So we've always been relationship. We've always had a value of a relationship. It's always been there in our value statements. I think when you look at Stuart and Irene, it kind of ebbs out of the two of them. But because of the size of who we are and some of the ways that we'd operated, we'd started to adopt organizational language. We'd started to think, maybe without even any design, around kind of business language and that kind of way of organizing ourselves. And Stuart made a really bold statement in sort of June, July last year. He says, I don't want to be seen as the CEO of this church. I want to be seen as the father of the house. And I think there's something really kind of powerful in a language change at that moment of time, which we began to summarize this kind of desired future state for us. So I'll speak loads of thoughts at the moment, but I thought it'd be really helpful just to get a bit of biblical wisdom for our Wednesday wisdom stuff at the moment. So as we go through this, I'm just going to reference Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a really important book for a live church. It's been a really important book in Stuart's life journey. And I just want to, again, just reference a few points. So Nehemiah, of course, is given a vision by God of a desired future state for Jerusalem. He knows, he's spoken to him, that the walls are down, it's in ruins, and he is the one who catches a brand new vision. And you see in Nehemiah 1, verses 3-4, it says this: the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, its gates have been burned with fire. When Nehemiah heard these things, he sat down and wept. And often that vision casting moment is a moment where it kind of begins to take your breath away, where you're like, we can't stay here any longer. We have to go here. And it's in that moment of time that we begin to restructure. So I suppose what I'm saying is don't restructure for restructuring's sake. That won't achieve anything. Only restructure, only go on a journey when you've heard clearly from God that there is something that he has spoken, that you've received that it feels good to you and the Holy Spirit. And then at that moment of time, you can start the restructuring process to get us there.
That's so good, Howard. And I suppose for a lot of our churches, they're kind of in this point now where we're in kind of lockdown 3 and we're starting to think about spring and summer, and as things potentially open up again, now that the vaccine's being rolled out, we're starting to think about what does church look like as we go back. Do we want to go back to church the way it was before, or can church look the way it did before? I think all of those are really important questions to ask, but this kind of seeking God and saying, God, what are you saying into the next season of church for us, and kind of going back to that place of what does the next chapter hold for us, I think is a really great starting place.
Absolutely.
For people.
Yeah, very much so. And for us, that little phrase I used there, it felt good to us and the Holy Spirit, was really important as well. So we have what we call the Vision Core team at Alive, and that's a body of people that are able to listen together. And there was most definitely a moment of time where every one of us as a Vision Core team had a collective moment of bringing together what we felt God was saying to us. And we'd heard individually and brought it together and began to shape something that was yes, this feels good to us and the Holy Spirit. So alongside your own individual prayer as church leaders, surround yourself with godly leaders who can help test those thoughts and catch some of that vision with you, because that'll only stand you in really good stead for the future. So yeah, point number 1, really that sense of have a biblical spirit-breathed vision. So once you've caught that, really then it is to begin to point number 2, strategize and plan. Strategize and plan. Now, this is often where different skill sets are needed than necessarily the vision casters. Those who are strategic and planners are sometimes not the same body of people who are those who catch the initial idea or catch the initial vision. Sometimes they are. In Nehemiah's case, he most definitely was. Some of the strategy we see with Nehemiah is he actually physically goes and looks around the walls. He assesses once again, where are we? Nehemiah 2, verse 13. By night I went out through the valley gate, through the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem. That sense of doing an assessment, looking at things in detail. Where are we at right now? It's a brilliant starting point for a strategic plan. Language like that, strategic plans, all those sort of things, don't get caught up in what they feel like they're complex things. They're not really. Effectively, your strategic plan is you writing down the steps between point A and point B. We want to get from here to here. Okay, so how are we going to do that? And for me, I would just say there's 2 bits in there. One is strategy and one is planning. So those 2 points, point A, we're here now, and point B, we need to get there. I would say strategy is kind of like the overarching overview of the way that we want to do it, the way we want to get there. Nehemiah did it through partnership. Nehemiah 2, 7-8, it says, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And then may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams of the gate of the citadel by the temple. So there's this sense that actually he knew that he couldn't do this on his own. So his overriding strategy was, I'm going to need some partners. I'm going to need some people to come alongside to help us do that. So look at those 2 points, because point B is probably a long way off. So strategy is, okay, so what's in us? How are we going to do that? But then the next part is putting the plan together. So for me, the difference between a strategy and a plan is the plan looks not at necessarily here, but actually what's your next step? What do we need to do right now to move us towards here? And then start to map those steps out. So again, in Nehemiah 3, you actually see through the whole of that chapter, Nehemiah outlines his plan, and that is that everybody starts to build at a local level. So Benjamin and Hassub made repairs in front of their house. That's a genius plan, because it basically says we're going to deal with what's in front of us right now. We can't do this over here just yet, so we're going to do this little bit, and then we're going to do this little bit, and then this little bit, and that's the plan. And if you can document that down and write it out in some way, you'll actually be able to, in a few minutes' time, we talk about it, assess it, look at what you've achieved, come back and say, what did we learn? How can we continue to grow? So strategy, overarching, how are we going to get there? You know, it's often going to take you a while to map that out. But plans, what do we need to do right now? And where do we need to go? So how are we going to get there? And what's our first step? I think strategize and plan would be my second point.
That's so good, Howard. So good. And I'm guessing you had lots of points on that plan.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. And of course, the plan is always, I mean, we'll come on to one thing in a few minutes' time, but the plan always is kind of flexible as well, because it's only until you do step 1 do you actually know how well step 2 is going to go and how well step 3 is going to go. And actually, when you've done step 3, sometimes you look at step 1 and think, oh, we missed some stuff there. We actually need to put a new step 3B in now rather than go straight on to 4. So there's always kind of movement and that sort of stuff. And that's why you need, again, a team around you, because all of those things are going to take different skill sets. They're going to take different people to think it through. And the beauty of working in a team is you get this diverse set of perspectives and viewpoints brought to something that can really help you strategize and plan.
Yeah. And I imagine that the continual feedback of the team as you go through those stages is really important as well. That kind of, you know, we think stage 1's gone really well. Someone else might think you missed something, or someone else might think actually stage 1 didn't go very well. And so that kind of continual feedback from a group of people around you, it must be really important in that process as well.
Yeah, it's hugely important. And I think, I mean, we're going to come on to bringing the people into the team as well in a moment. And actually, how do we maximize the skill set of people around us? But then creating environments that are trusted and safe environments for people to be able to voice that kind of assessment with a sense that it's not personal. We're actually all wanting the same outcome. We're wanting this to be point B up here. We want to get us to there. But at the moment, we're learning some stuff in that journey. And how do we articulate that learning really, really well so it allows us to move towards point B as quickly and as well as we possibly can?
That's so good. So what's your third point, Howard?
So a bit of American language, this one, but engage the talent you need to get from A to B. And I think there's a few things in this, because this is all about people. And the first thing to say is that a restructuring will require new people and fresh thinking. For us, we did that in a number of ways, but our life pastors and our group of life pastors, for many of them, they weren't involved at that level of pastoral leadership within the life of the church until this moment of time. And Jason, you and I can talk about this because you are now one of those life pastors. And one of the things that we just knew as part of our plan is we're going to need new people, different ways of thinking, different skill sets to come in and make this plan come to fruition. And sometimes that also means that not everyone will get it. Not everyone will understand it. Not everyone will see it. In a moment, we're going to talk about communication and how we can perhaps help to overcome some of those hurdles. But actually, Nehemiah again teaches us that some just won't get this. Nehemiah 2:19. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you are doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? And this sense that actually, I mean, they were outsiders looking in, but actually not everybody's going to come on the journey. And when you restructure, we don't like this as pastors. There's a potential that some people won't get it and won't want to come with us. And we have to be bold enough and strong enough and resilient enough. That's the best word, actually. Resilient enough to know that actually that's okay. It's okay for them and it's okay for us. Because of our restructure and possibly that fresh vision that we've articulated, that isn't for everybody. It's not what they've invested into at that moment of time. And therefore, it's an opportunity for people to reassess at that moment of time. Now, that is painful for many of us. And it's worth just acknowledging at this moment of time that restructuring and going through structural changes is fraught with change. And change is received in many different ways by many different personality types. And you have to, I think, have a resilience to the vision. That's where we're heading, but also an openness and empathy to people in the midst of that, to be open for conversations, questions, processing, allow people in their time and their journey to become a part of the journey, etc. But be, as I say, be resilient enough to know that it's not going to be everybody that will come with us. So my two kind of points in that: engage the talent. The first is it requires new people and fresh thinking. Any fresh restructure will be challenged by our old mindsets, be challenged by our old way of doing things, challenged by our own thinking. And it's worth us as leaders naming that and saying, I always think like this. We're going to need a new way of thinking to get to here. Personally, I'm in that at the moment. I've changed my job role in the middle of all of this, and I'm transitioning my old job into a team of people who are carrying that, and they're doing a brilliant job. But so much of my time over the last number of years has been given to that job. And therefore, I'm sometimes feeling I don't quite know how to be in this new role over here. And that's a really interesting thing. So we need fresh thinking. But the other thing to say in Engage the Talent is that not everybody will get it, and not everybody will come on that plan with us to the future. And that's okay.
And I suppose that's why it's so important to make sure we nail point one, isn't it? To make sure we know the real reason why that we're making this change, why we're restructuring, is because this is a God-breathed thing. And if it's God-breathed, you're much more likely to kind of accept the kind of hurdles that you have to overcome, or the people that might not want to come with you, because you can see the bigger picture, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, just to reiterate, the people who don't necessarily want to come with this plan at this moment, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
We should be, as I say, resilient enough to bless and allow them to go, as long as they're continuing in God and within the local church, etc., and being a blessing wherever God has called them to. That's a good thing, because it's better for us to know that the people that we're journeying with are with us in this. And it's better for them to be in an environment that they know they can commit to. I think but it is in moments like this that there'll be more shifting and moving and those sort of things. So just be prepared for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really good. So that brings us nicely onto communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, in the spirit of location, I've just put communication, and just a few thoughts.
And you never do it enough.
Absolutely. Well, there is one of the points. You can never communicate enough. You will think as a leader that you have communicated it more than enough. You will think that people are bored. You will think that people have heard it more than once. You will think you'll be bored of saying it. You'll be bored of articulating and conveying it. But the truth is, you can never say it enough. You can never communicate it enough. People will receive it in different ways and at different times. So a couple of things around that. Find some consistent language. Find some language that every one of your leaders, everyone who's caught it early, can start to convey. Because there's nothing worse than you trying to convey a vision and people conveying a distorted view of that vision. A little bit like driving your car with the snow still on the front of it if you've not wiped it off, that sort of thing. It's dangerous and you don't want to do it. And in a similar way, you don't want a distorted view of the vision. So you've got your vision, find some language to clearly articulate that vision with super clarity. So easy for people to understand, in order that when other people start to convey it, there's no nuance in that. There's no kind of grey areas in it, or as much as possible. And work hard on that, because the words we use form the culture that will become, or they form part of the vision. So really important. And always start with the why. As you've just said, Jason, it's so important. You know, start with that God-breathed, spirit-breathed vision. That is, it counts for so much. So often, I think in life, we're given tasks to do, and we're empowered to do things, or tasks are kind of given down to us, and they go so much easier, and things are so much more fruitful when we understand why we're doing that thing, that we've got a picture of the bigger thing that we're working towards. Without that, the people ultimately will perish. That's what scripture tells us. Again, Nehemiah 2:17-18. Then I said to them, this is Nehemiah talking to the people, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire, painting a picture of the now. Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, painting the picture here, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. What a brilliant start with the why. God has spoken this over us. This is where we're going. We're no longer going to be in disgrace. We don't have to stay here. Wow. And interestingly, it's only the next verse, and it said, and the people got to it, which is, I'd be like, if that had happened, that'd just be amazing in our day and age, wouldn't it? But this articulate a vision, start with a why. Again, you can't communicate enough. Remember that people receive information at different points. There are people who are early adopters. You know, you can say it once and they're on board. They've got it. They'll run with you. They'll early adopt and they'll run fast and hard with that particular vision. There are others, the majority of us, who take some processing to adopt an idea. You've got some questions to ask, got some feedback to bring, got some understanding to go on, and that's all good. In fact, it should strengthen your strategic plan. It should strengthen your planning by receiving that information. And there are some that are late adopters. You know, they need to see it. They need to feel it. They're kinetic learners. They need to understand it at a much deeper level in order for them to say, yes, we're in this. And all of those people groups are all good. Don't find yourself over questioning the late adopters. Just go on a journey with them and allow them opportunities to taste and see. Create the right language. New language is really helpful in forming new structures. And I would say in that as well, discover the words that you're no longer going to use, and then discover the new words that you're going to use to replace them with. And effectively try really hard to cut that old language out of your dialogue, almost to a point where if it comes up again, it feels jarring to you. Oh, that doesn't feel like the language we use around here anymore. Cut away the old language, adopt brand new language, because it's really helpful in journeying towards that restructure. And then the final thing, certainly for the late adopters and that majority of people in that middle body, really, create safe spaces for conversations and questions. That's really important, especially in a restructure where change is happening and people's place that they function or serve or give into might be up for some change and restructure. Often in that moment of time, big questions are being asked of themselves. Is my purpose? Where do I give myself to? All of those sort of things that create space for conversations and questions and allow people to come on the journey of processing. And remember, in your head, you've communicated it enough, but actually on the ground, you haven't yet, because people need to hear it in a whole variety of ways, in different ways. Some need it proclaiming and declaring, some need it in a conversation, some need to ask questions of it. So again, be resilient to all of that, because all of that helps people come on the journey with you.
Yeah, and that's such great wisdom, Howard. Such great wisdom. I was going to say, one of the things I think is really important in your strategize and plan section is to really think about how you're going to communicate and when, and include that in your strategy, include that in your plan. These are the people we're going to tell this week. These are the people we're going to tell next week.
Very good.
These are the people we're going to have an individual conversation with. And think about how those different people groups and different teams need to receive that information. I think is really important. And just, I think we've got to allow people that opportunity to catch the vision, haven't we? If you're the one who's kind of received that from God and then is putting it in place, you're kind of 3 miles down the road than everybody else, and you're kind of like, come on guys, and everyone else is like, hang on a minute, we've got to get our head around this. And we've got to allow people that opportunity to catch it, haven't we, like you said, Howard, and
Absolutely,
adopt that for themselves and almost hear God for themselves as well. For them to be able to come fully on board with what you're planning. So
yeah, very good.
Wisdom.
Very good.
So we've communicated. What next? Aren't we finished?
Well, yeah, in a way we have, and because actually the last two weave themselves in through the whole of this. So I'll combine them really. But number 5, evaluate, assess, and measure. One of the things that I think as visionaries and vision casters, etc., is that we live in that vision casting. One of the things that strategists and planners live in is the actual, how are we doing in all of this? And any good restructure needs to be able to ask and answer the questions, actually, how is it going? How are we doing? Where are we learning? What things are we not doing as well as we possibly could do as well? So a couple of thoughts around that. The first is set some objectives that can be measured. And again, big language, possibly might feel a bit complicated, some of that language, but set some objectives that can be measured. And my suggestion is that try and make those as tangible as you possibly can. So by this date, we will have chatted with X number of people in the church. That's a great objective because you've got a date to it. You've got a number of people that you can measure. And then you can assess that. So did we achieve that by that date? Did we speak to all of those people? If not, then you've got some brilliant learning. So what did we learn? Why couldn't we do that? Well, we couldn't do that because these things happened. We went back into another lockdown and we couldn't assess. Okay, so what are we now going to do? Are we going to continue with that point, or do we need to move forward, or do we need to pause and say, actually, we need to deal with that bit right now, etc. So set objectives that can be measured. And again, don't get bogged down in the language of that. You can make it quite nicely achievable. So what are we trying to achieve, and how do we know that we're doing it? That's basically what we're saying there. But be prepared in your evaluation, your assessment, and your measurements to understand that any restructure will face challenges, setbacks, opposition, etc. You only have to read Nehemiah whole of chapter 4 and understand that actually the whole thing came under opposition. And in little ways and in other ways, so will the restructuring that you're going to do. And that's why assessment, measuring, evaluating is really helpful, because it allows you to stop and pause and think, okay, we're still going here. We've got a vision. We know where we're heading. But actually, we're facing a challenge here. So what are we going to do about that challenge right now? How are we going to overcome that? Who do we need to help us? How can we move forward in that one? And my final thought around the evaluating, assessing, and measuring around that is to make sure that we, as the team who are involved as the kind of the lead team in restructuring, is make sure we keep our eye on the big picture. The restructure may be only a part of what it is that God has called you to do. So again, use Nehemiah for a moment. Nehemiah quite quickly could have got bogged down in the building of the walls. He could have taken his eyes off the purpose of why Jerusalem was being rebuilt, the vision, the picture, and got bogged down in the actually we need this amount of bricks here and those sort of things. All of that is important, but it's not the most important thing. So as we assess and we monitor, one of the great things to do is ask the question, and how are we doing in getting us towards this picture? So you assess that little thing, but you assess it with a view on the big picture of where God is taking us. And for Nehemiah, that looked like the exiled people returning. It looked like blessing the poor in the city. There was a whole variety of things above and beyond just putting the walls up that were more important than those the tasks of the daily thing. And the final thought on all of this, so evaluate, assess, and measure. And the final thought is, once you've evaluated and assessed and measured, is be flexible. There is, when you look at your plan and you look at how you're doing getting towards point B, moving from point A to point B, you will learn so much. You will discover things on a regular basis that inform the direction of travel. And the rigidity of your final picture does not mean that you have to be rigid in all of your steps. Your steps towards that final picture might be flexible. So I'll illustrate this. We in one or two of our communities, we had a few people that we thought they might be brilliant life pastors. So we started to have conversations with a number of people, well, a few people who actually aren't life pastors now. And in those conversations, it transpired that actually it wasn't right for them. Now, we might have had a plan. We could have rigidly stuck to it. We could have made a decision off the back of them saying it's not right for us to do a number of things. We chose to be flexible. We chose to go and look at, okay, so if it's not right for them, who's God saying it is right for? And we start to have other conversations and go wider and start to think in new ways again. And all of a sudden, the flexibility of that plan, again, a fixed destination, but the flexibility of where you're going is led by what you're understanding in your evaluation, your assessments, your measuring, etc. And you can do that all the time. Again, back to communication, loads of communication at those moments. You know, these people, it's not right for them, but let's make sure as a team we understand that this isn't an attack against us. It's just not right for them. Let's be flexible. Let's go in a different direction. And certainly through COVID, haven't we all had to be flexible? You know, we've had to reinvent quickly, do new things in new ways all the time. And if you're in some way paralyzed by that phraseology of restructuring, I can almost guarantee that you have spent the last 12 months restructuring like you perhaps never knew you would have to. And I know, and I empathize with you. For some of you, you're perhaps tired of that at this moment of time, perhaps just having the freshness of, can I get up again to get a fresh vision for something in the future? Well, my prayer for you, and I know it will be the full ground level team, is pray for a fresh infilling of the Holy Spirit, so that actually as you go through this process, if you seek God for what's in your future with your church, that actually there'll be a fresh impetus of his Spirit that wakes you up every morning and gives you that impetus to see point B when you know that at the moment you're in point A.
That's so good, Howard. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Pleasure.
Been absolutely great. Do you mind if we ask people if they want to send any questions in? Are you happy to answer some of those?
That'd be brilliant. Yes, please do.
Great. So we'll pop the email in the chat if you're watching with us on YouTube, and feel free to send us your email and we'll pass those on to Howard. But Howard, thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, and big virtual round of applause. And we hope to chat to you again soon.
Bless you, Jason. Thanks so much for the opportunity.